accountants and AEs, billing done right. So, the focus of this webinar series has really been on the role within the agency, and then the features and processes specific to the role, and how to use the system best within that role. So with accountants and AEs, the focus today is billing, looking at billing processes. So we're going to be talking a bit about some of the different ways that you can run billing through the system, and trying to provide suggestions as to some different workflows that you can manage. So let's get into it here. With regards to our agenda, specifically what we're covering. So we're going to be looking at invoicing workflows when AEs need to inform accounting of what needs to be invoiced and why. I'm going to read the next point and talk about them. So invoicing workflows when AEs are creating the invoices and accountants are approving / syncing with accounting, with the accounting program. So what I mean by those workflow options is, we see a lot of different styles of relationships between the bookkeeping side of things and the AE or account manager side of things with the different agencies that we work with. In some cases, we're seeing account executives are simply informing the accountant or the bookkeeper of what needs to be invoiced, but they're not actually doing it themselves. And then the bookkeeper is actually the one that's creating the invoice. And there's, of course, a lot of validity to that workflow. It makes sense for a lot of agencies. Then there's another scenario we see where the AEs are actually the ones creating the invoices. So they're actually generating them, and in some cases, even the ones that you're sending it to the client, kind of taking out that bookkeeper middleman. But there's usually some sort of approval process involved in that. So we're going to talk about some of the options there, and some of the different ways you might manage it. There's a lot of different ways in between, but we always do recommend that the AEs try to involve them as much in the billing process as you can, and take as much of the back and forth out of the process as you can. So we're going to be looking at that today. Then we're going to be looking at, of course, the creation of the actual invoices. So, generating the fixed fee, time and materials, and retainer style invoices, and what goes into that, and some of the options that you have there. And then we're going to be looking at batch invoices as well. Now I'm going to launch a poll regarding these topics, so I can kind of get an understanding as to, what everyone's most interested in seeing. So, I want to make sure that if people are more interested in the creation of the actual invoices, the different options you have there, and how you can manage that, then we won't spend as much time on the workflows. I have a hunch that the workflow is more what people are interested in, and that seems to be what the poll is representing now, as we have about 60% voted on that. So we're going to cover everything today, so don't worry. Right now we're looking at about 9% are as being interested in the creation of batch invoices, so it's pretty low, but we are going to cover that because it does relate to the workflow. So, all of these topics we'll make sure to go over. So thank you for voting into that. So we're looking at 71% are interested in the invoicing workflows, 22% creation of the individual invoices, and 7% creation of the batch invoices. One thing I kind of skipped over, I'm going to scroll back up here, is, of course, I do have my wonderful co-presenter, Sophia Wilson, on the line with me today. No relation to myself. The last name is a coincidence, although I'm sure you can find one if you go far back enough. Sophia, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Hi, Mark.
Thanks for joining in. Sophie's going to be answering your questions today, and on that topic of the questions, please do use the Sophia, are you still on there? Can you say something? Oh wait, okay, no, we're good. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, as per always, please do ask as many questions as you'd like. Anything that we can show on screen, we will do our best to do so. Anything that we're not able to answer, at the time of the question being asked, we will follow up with answers remotely sometime later on this week or early next week, but usually pretty quickly. So please do feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. Sometimes we get so many questions flying at Sophie that it's a little bit hard to keep up with, and then other times it's more of kind of like a watch and learn type scenario. We get a little bit less, so we'll of course see what we have happening today. Going to be taking a look at some of the skill development tools and resources, pointing out the community forum and product input, very important items that I like to show at the start of every webinar. And I do want to mention that our next session is 2 weeks from now, same bat time, same bat channel, 27th of July. We're going to be focusing on the creatives role. So when I say creatives, it's really anyone that's an end user of Function Point. So you know, a designer, editor, illustrator, copywriter, or you know, even if it's a different industry that you're working in, anyone that's kind of the end user. You know, those people that are tracking time, managing their tasks, managing their to-dos, and looking at the jobs that they're working on and things like that. So please do join into that webinar or ask your team to join into that webinar. I'm curious to see what kind of attendance rate we get on that one. As per usual, please like us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter, check out our Pinterest board, connect with us on LinkedIn, watch our YouTube videos, and do whatever it is that this thing is telling you to do. Okay, let's get started. Sophie, am I forgetting anything? Sometimes I'll forget something and I don't realize it.
No, you're not forgetting anything. I guess the only thing I'd sort of throw out there with that whole tweet thing is the Ask the Intern fun that we're having right now.
Good point. Good point. So, Sophie, what's the hashtag on that? Is it like hashtag Ask the Intern?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to ask any ridiculous questions or any ridiculous tasks for our interns here at Function Point, just hashtag Ask the Intern and tweet at Function Point. I have already been having them do push-ups for days, so I don't know if anyone else is interested in something ridiculous like that.
And didn't you say you were going to get them to wash your car today?
I was going to, and then someone stole that one from me, so I haven't.
Oh.
I can't do it.
Well, too bad. Maybe we can get them to do it another time. Yeah, so hashtag Ask the Intern at functionpoint.com. Check it out. There's lots of pretty funny stuff going on with that crew, and they're a great crew, so we love having them here. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started here. Now, the first thing that we're going to be jumping into is, and of course, as I always like to mention, up at the top right of your system, if you hover over the question mark, you are going to see a few different resources available. So starting from the bottom, feature requests. So if there's anything you want the system to do that it doesn't currently do, you're going to want to go into there. It'll ask you to create a login. It is a login that's different from your system login. It's a different portal, but you'll be able to see the features that have been requested, upvote others, see the communications regarding them. So there's lots of good stuff happening there. Of course, contacting support. And then there's also the webinar link as well. So if you select this, you're going to be brought to the page where you can register for the upcoming webinars and also see the recordings of the previous webinars. So this one that we're on right now, the recording will be available here shortly after the webinar, by tomorrow anyways. And then lastly, there's the training site, and there's lots of great resources available there, so I recommend you checking it out. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be doing is taking a look at the workflow for AEs, really communicating information, understanding what needs to be billed, and communicating the data to your accounting team to help them to understand what needs to be billed, and then having that go through a bit of a workflow process. Now, some of the things that I'm going to show today may not actually be set up in your system. Some of the tags or the terminologies or the statuses, may not be set up in a way that is allowing for the type of workflows that we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to be talking about how you can make those changes and how you can ensure that you have the right thing set up and the right thing occurring. So first things first, we're really going to be focusing a lot on the jobs module today and looking at the jobs module and using that module to see what needs to be invoiced and why. So as an account executive, something that's really important is the ability to do a job find and find accurate information. For example, if I do a job find and I select myself as the account executive, if I select find active, or if I use the statuses that would represent active, but if I just select find active, that list really must be accurate. If this list is not accurate, then everything that you're going to be seeing today is going to be difficult. So it's really important that when you do that find, you find accurate data. Hypothetically, if you don't, cleaning it up isn't that bad, even if you've been using the system for years. I've seen a couple agencies that I've worked with where they've been using the system for a very long time, and when they do a find active under jobs, they get hundreds or maybe even thousands of entries. And really what all that you need to do is ask each of your AEs to do that find, search for active, and then up at the top left, select editable list view, which is something we're going to be looking at today, and just go through and adjust those statuses. Make sure that you close those jobs and put them to whatever status you use is typically going to be closed. That's appropriate, and clean up that list. Now, that being said, assuming that the data is accurate, as the AE, what I need to do on a regular basis is I need to look at my list of jobs, and I need to determine what needs to be invoiced and communicate that information to the accountant, using the workflow example that we're going to be looking at first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the job find, and I'm going to use the category field. Now, the category field, by default, for any new system, for any client that signed up with Function Point in the last couple of years, the default terminology is going to be retainer, time materials, and fixed price. Now, this is a customizable field, so the terminology may be different in your system. Furthermore, if you signed up with Function Point, let's say like 5 years ago, I believe the field was defaulted to be blank, so it'll only exist with the content that you put in there. This field, this category field, is entered, the values are entered when you are adding an estimate into the system. So when you're adding an estimate / opening a job, you'll find the category field. Now, there isn't an option to make it mandatory, unfortunately, so you do need to select that. But what it allows you to do is say, I want to do a job find for all of the fixed price jobs where I am the account executive. I'm then going to select Find Active, and I'm then getting the result of my search. So I can see that, I have 6 fixed price jobs where I am the account executive that are currently open right now. What we're seeing then here is the default column structure. So, the name of the job, the type, the status, the due dates, the estimated value, actual value, variance, how much we've invoiced, and a comparison between our invoice and our actual. So looking at this, I can see, what we estimated, which is going to be the value of our fixed price, and what we've actually invoiced. Now, I've done this based on a single category. You could do it for all of your jobs, especially if you're an agency that typically bills all of your work in the same way. But here is a good method for providing the bookkeeper with the information that they need to understand what needs to be billed, because it's not always straightforward. It could be milestone-based. Oftentimes, if the accountant is the person doing the invoicing, they're not going to know if a milestone has been reached. So the AE needs to let them know. You don't want to do that one by one. You don't want to have them, knocking on the door or walking over to your desk or, sending you Post-it notes saying, hey, please bill job 30320 for this amount. You want to be doing it on a consistent and regular basis in a consistent and regular way. So one method is to pull up that jobs list, and on the left side, select Editable List View. Now, when you select Editable List View, it's going to open up the list and allow you to do things such as change the status and also change the comment description. It's called date description. I used to call it comment description. And this comment description can allow us to, include information. So, it could be bill remaining 50%. Now, this is something that you need to update regularly because it's not going to update automatically. It's not going, the text isn't going to change to, bill next 25%. You need to enter the value or comment that communicates the data. Going through the list, updating the information to show what then needs to be invoiced. That list can then be produced into a report, and there's a couple things that I want to show related to that. But before I do, there's one other aspect that I want to mention related to this type of workflow, and that is the status. Now, I have a very standard default status setup: open, closed, canceled, draft, and invoiced. And then there's also on hold. Undefined and inactive are just ways of of saying if there's some old inactive status that you used years ago but you no longer use it, then you can kind of pull those up, and then undefined is basically nothing. So that you'll notice it's sandwiching the actual statuses that you use, and you'd of course want to use your real statuses. One thing that you can do is use the status fields to represent the fact that a job needs to be invoiced. Now, this needs to be managed regularly. So if you're going to do this, somebody, in this case the AEs, needs to be very much on top of it. Now, the way that I might do that is by going into my system setup, and I'm going to go into list maintenance. Now, list maintenance is a list of every list that you can customize in the system. One of the options that we have here is job status. I could create a new status and call it ready to bill. I see this a lot. I see it very often. It's done successfully when the statuses and the due dates and the comments are managed on a very consistent basis. That status should be an alias of open. In other words, it's telling the system this is active. This is not a closed job. It's still an active item. That will then allow you, when you're looking at your list and you make it editable, to go through and change the status to ready to bill. And I'm going to make those all ready to bill really quickly here. Now, something that you might also want to do, because when you first arrive at this page, when you first arrive at your list view, the default setup doesn't include, oh, sorry, of course I changed all the statuses, so redoing that same search won't find it. So I'm going to pull that list up again by going to ready to bill and then selecting find. We're going to find the same list that we were just looking at. But you'll notice that that comment description is not showing in the default list. So what I need to do is choose to manage columns, which you've seen if you've watched a lot of the other webinars. I include this a lot. One of the options you'll find is date description. And I might kind of reorder these in a way that I need. So I'm going to move this over by status and then save it. And that then allows me to see what these comments were. So that's something that's important for the AE and then the bookkeeper, the person who's actually doing the invoice in this workflow example, being able to come in, job find for ready to bill, and see the exact instructions that they need to know, about what should be billed, and then perhaps going in and making any adjustments to these comments as well. Now, let's say that in this example, and Sophie, I noticed that I actually should check in with you. I'm seeing question marks pop up and then pop down, so it looks like you're handling that pretty well. Anything that you think we should address at this time?
No, I think everything's going pretty smoothly so far. I guess the only thing I'd sort of just shout out there is this webinar is being recorded, so don't worry, guys. If Mark starts talking too fast like he normally does, you will be able to watch it again later.
It's a very good point. I'm really trying to work on that. So I'm trying to make sure I don't go too fast. So I apologize if I'm a little speedy. There's always a lot of content to cover in these items, and it's also a kind of fine balance of moving too fast and trying to cover too much, but trying to cover what's important to everyone. But yeah, as Sophie mentioned, it is recorded. You will be able to check it out later. Now we have our list. I know I've said this a few times. It's really important to maintain the list very closely. So let's say, for example, that we're looking at this list. We're going through as an account executive. You could then do anything you want to inform the bookkeeper. You could send them an email, send them a text message, do whatever you need to do, or perhaps it doesn't even need to be communicated. The bookkeeper just needs to know that they're going to do a job find for ready to bill, and then they're going to pull up that list, and it needs to be a list of everything that is ready to bill. What I mean by that is once the bill is done, the statuses need to be reverted, and that does need to be done manually unless it is a final invoice. So, for example, we're not going to look at batch invoicing right now. We're going to look at individual invoicing, and I'm going to show two examples in this workflow from the bookkeeper's perspective. So, whether this is provided to me in a report, so I might be given a report on my desk, and actually that's something I recommend kind of pulling out, maybe resizing, having in like a separate window, or even just minimize so you can pull it back up so that I can see, okay, the bike shipping package 30307, bill remaining 50%. So that I can come in here and say, okay, well, this particular job, I'm going to select it. I'm going to select to add new invoice, and I'm going to enter 50% of my estimated value, click Add Invoice, and I've now created an invoice for the remaining 50%. And actually, there was something I wanted to show there really quick. I'm going to delete this guy and kind of come back to it. In this case, this is the remaining 50%. So what I could do is choose an invoice type of final. Selecting final invoice is going to change the status of the job to invoiced. That means that if it's the final invoice, I no longer need to go back and update the status and ready to bill, because it's going to automatically change to invoiced, which is the equivalent of closed, and it is an inactive status. It's gone. It's still in the system, of course, but it's gone from your active list. So if it's the remaining 50%, or the final milestone bill, or the final month of the retainer, or the final time materials invoice, whatever it may be, selecting final will then change the job status to invoiced. So there's my invoice for 50%. What that means is if I go back to my jobs list and I'm going to click on the jobs header to repeat the last search that I did, it's going to bring me back to the list, and that bike package is gone because it no longer has a status of ready to bill. It's been changed to invoiced. Whereas this job, Direct Mail Galaxy 4, is not the final invoice. It's the first. We haven't done an invoice for this yet. So when I select it, and let's say we're going to do an invoice for, well, let's keep it simple. Let's just say 50%. I'm going to choose to add a new invoice for 50%. I'm leaving it as interim. Select that invoice. That my invoice is created for my 50%. When I go back to my list, that job is still there. And once I go through them all, it's really important then to make sure, once I'm done my list or one by one, that I am updating the status back to open for anything that is going to get another invoice against it at a later date. Because that ready to bill status, if you're going to utilize that, really needs to be maintained and regularly updated so that the job statuses are always accurate. If you are dealing with a very, very high volume of jobs, what I'm showing you right now is probably not as applicable, and especially if you're working in a retainer scenario where you have jobs that don't really close every month, it's just ongoing, or you do a job for each month and they're just constantly closing and the statuses aren't all that applicable. Batch invoicing is probably more applicable. We will be talking about that a little bit more, so just keep that in mind. But you're not going to be really changing these as often. You're just going to be, perhaps still entering a comment if you want the AEs to communicate the information, but you're not going to be, changing these statuses back and forth if you're dealing with a very high volume of jobs. And when I say very high, I'm talking hundreds per person. If you have 5 AEs and each one of them is dealing with 70 active jobs a month or something like that, that's a high volume. That's a lot of jobs for an agency. That being said, and I'm talking not every month, but maybe at any given time. That being said, I am of the opinion that a list of anything under 100 is possible to manage in this fashion. It's because you're not always going to have jobs that are going to be billed every single month. It's only the ones that are being billed every single month. So I really believe that you can facilitate this workflow even with a relatively high amount of jobs. Only the extreme levels of jobs is this getting to the point where it's not manageable and you need to do something a bit more automated. Okay, and then of course the AE is also needing to pull up a list of their jobs regularly. So if these are all going being set back to open as the bookkeeper is doing those invoices. then the AE is needing to, regularly do a job find, perhaps at certain intervals, once a month, saying I'm going to do a job find for myself, and maybe I won't narrow it down by category. I'm just going to select Find Active, and I'm going to, make this list editable, and I'm going to take out those comments, whatever the billing comments might be, so that it's very clear to me what's going on with all of them, and I have that in my default view, so I can see in my default view, because I've managed those columns, what all of those comments are. So, if anything that you think that we should address on screen, any questions this time that you think would be important to cover?
You know what, Mark? I have to admit there's a question that's come in that has stumped me, but I think it is more around printing preferences with invoicing. So I'm actually going to ask Daryl if he doesn't mind connecting outside of this webinar so we can go through this in greater detail.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is the AEs creating the invoices themselves. And I am a huge fan of this. This is something that I always recommend to agencies that I speak with whenever possible, is to take out the back and forth communication between the AEs and the bookkeeper. And this is, for a lot of agencies, is a brand new way of thinking. It's something that they've never really done before. Others have been doing it for a while. I believe it is the when possible, because not everything is always a perfect world. When possible, it is the superior workflow to have the AEs doing their own invoicing. And there's a few different options, because typically what's going to happen there is there's going to be some sort of approval process, some sort of way for a bookkeeper or a CEO or a creative director or owner, whatever it may be, somebody to approve the invoices that the AEs are generating. Now, the process for creating them could be singular or it could be in a batch. Now, we're going to look at just creating a couple invoices here, and then we're going to take a look at some approval routines and talk about how you can make that a regular thing that you're doing, including the potential of your accounting sync. So we're going to go through that in detail here. Then we're going to circle back and we're going to look at the batch side of things and creating batch invoices. So, first of all, again, it's, as I kind of, speak towards this for, probably the 10th time in this webinar alone, it's really important for the AE to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to do a search for myself, and I'm going to select Find Active. Now, if you are a company that has a mix of billing types, so, we bill, certain jobs in some ways, and others, we bill in different ways. So perhaps we have fixed price, time materials, retainer, kind of all the above. I work with a lot of agencies that have billing types that almost can't really have a label put on them, although you want to try. Maybe it's time materials up into a certain agreed upon maximum, but the materials are in addition, and there's some sort of recurring billing aspect to it. So it's not always cut and dry. I understand this. But that being said, if you can place labels in the category that allow you to immediately understand how something should be billed, then it's very helpful when you're doing these workflows. So what I mean by that is that category field, and I can include it in this list. So I do a job find for myself as the AE for active, and here are all of my active jobs. I can then to manage these columns, and I can add in the job category. And I'm going to slide that over beside the status. What that then allows me to see is how we intend to build these jobs. And you'll notice that there's 3 blanks. So I have, some time materials, I have some fixed price, I have a retainer here, and then I have some blank items. These 3 jobs in this case are the jobs that we don't intend to bill. They are included in a retainer value, or they could have been internal jobs. It's just jobs that we don't intend to invoice. And I see this done in 2 ways. One is have it blank, which I have here. The other option is to have some sort of category that represents non-billable, or retainer included or something like that. I prefer to have a blank, but it is up to you. So this allows me to then go through and see what's my category? How do I intend to bill these? Most AEs are going to look at the job, look at the client, and immediately know what needs to be invoiced. They're on top of these things. They're maintaining these relationships. They're speaking with the design team. They're speaking with the creative director, and they understand. Okay, it's time in this case to bill, for the uninvoiced, time for this particular job, for example. But if AEs need to keep notes for themselves, there's a good place to do it, and that's the date description. And we make this list editable, and we're able to go through and update, any kind of comments we want on any of these jobs. Now, in this case, in my scenario, I have a mix. I have some retainers, I have some time materials, I have some fixed price. I am going to create these invoices individually. I'm just going to go through and generate the invoices, and then they're going to be ready for my bookkeeper to review. Before we generate the invoice, I want to show an option for facilitating an approval workflow. And this is going to be really important if you start to use an AE, initiated invoice creation for the first time. What I recommend doing is going into your admin section, and under System Setup and System Preferences, under Invoice. So in the Invoice section of the System Preferences, there is an option to use an invoice approval routine. Now, I believe that this is defaulted to be turned off because it's an extra step that for a lot of agencies isn't really necessary, but I turned it on for this case. And you can also choose whether or not you want the invoices to be approved upon creation or pre-approved, in other words, not approved upon creation, and then have somebody need to be going in and approving that. So I'm going to turn on the approval routine, and I'm going to say I want them pre-approved upon creation. Now what that means is when I go into my jobs list, and I say, okay, well, I'm going to create 3 invoices here. I'm going to invoice the web maintenance for my unbilled time, and I'm going to bill my direct mail for 50% of the value, and I'm going to bill this retainer for 100% of the value. So let's use this first one here. Notice that I have $25,000 estimated. I have $26,000 actual, so we've actually gone over a little bit. I've invoiced $73.75, and I have $18,775 worth of unbilled time and expenses, and I want to invoice that amount. And actually, this might be a really good opportunity to show off some real-world scenarios here. I'm going to generate an invoice, and then we're going to take a look at some cases that this might trigger. So the first thing I'm going to do is, of course, select the job, and I'm going to choose to add a new invoice, and then I'm going to choose to calculate from my actuals. Now you'll notice there's an option for actuals and remainder from actuals. If you're billing time and materials, it's very important to understand the difference between these two options. Actuals is the value, the billable value of all unbilled time and expenses. Remainder from actuals is the dollar value that is a difference between what you've invoiced and the work that you've done. So if I had a $100 timesheet and I invoiced it for $50, that is a billed timesheet. That timesheet has been billed for $50. Selecting actuals, it's not going to populate on my invoice. But there was a $50 variance between what the value was and what we actually billed. Selecting remainder from actuals will include that $50. I find this to be more common. Most of the time, if you've already billed a timesheet and you've billed it for less than it was worth, that's usually a conscious decision. So you're going to choose actuals. Or if you choose remainder from actuals, which I'm going to do in this case, it is going to pull up the entire value of everything that's ever been done, billed or not, and then compare it to the invoice value and give us our total invoice amount. So there we can see, all the different line items. Actually, I'm noticing I'm missing some accounts here. And we can go through, we can see all the timesheets that we're invoicing for. So there's a whole bunch of unbilled timesheets here. Now, in this case, I might not want to bill this entire amount. We've already invoiced this value, and we've actually gone over budget. So if I decide, okay, I actually can't invoice more than what I estimated, I have full control on this page. I can choose to blank this amount. I can manually type in a dollar value. I can also choose to calculate the remainder from estimated, reset those values, and then choose to invoice the remainder of estimated. So invoice, what would be, adhering to the budget. So there's options for anything that you want to do here. Make sure my accounts are filled in. And you can control that at the time of invoice creation. If I go back to my jobs list, I'm going to create 2 more invoices. We'll check in with Sophie, and then we'll take a look at that approval process. And actually, if we look at that invoice that I just created, something that you're going to notice right away is that it is not approved. If we jump back to that jobs list, let's say that I'm just going to do another quick invoice for this job here. And actually, let's take a look. We're going to do this one, and we're going to do this for 50% of estimated. We'll say it's a final as well. Invoice is generated, and then we're going to take a look at our retainer, and our retainer value is $10,000 a month, so we're just going to choose to invoice this for 100% of estimated, which is our default option. So there's our $10,000 invoice. I now have 3 invoices generated in the system. The bookkeeper then needs to review them, and they need to post and sync them to accounting. So there's 2 things that they could do for that to be notified. One is, just have it be a manual notification. So they emails them or pins a note or sends a hip chat or whatever it might be, or they could have the system automatically emailing them when those invoices are generated. I would recommend, instead of those, it just being a regular occurrence. So every week or 2, the accountant is doing an invoice find. They're doing an invoice find for unapproved invoices. Select find, and I get the results of my search. Here are my 3 invoices. If I get a mix of approved and unapproved, so if I didn't search by that, I can, of course, include the approval option within the list so that I can see if they have been approved or not. Now, you cannot update this in bulk, so if you do want to approve them, you need to select the invoice, click Approved, click on the main header again, and your list will be refined. Select the next one, review it if you want to, of course, approve it, back to your list, until by the end there will be no results of your search, because there are no more unapproved invoices. There's also an aspect of this that is the accounting export that can actually facilitate an approval routine as well. So if you just want to check in with yourself, any questions you think we should answer on screen about anything that we've been talking about in the last few minutes?
Hi, Mark. There is sort of one question that I was actually just typing out, but I'm wondering if maybe you have a better response to it. We have Lisa, who is just kind of curious about, you can search by job financials by a specific date range, but why are we unable to invoice by those date ranges? That's a bit of a toughie. It's more of a question, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think I understand. So if we look, let me kind of explain what that question, what's being asked there. So let's look at a job that would have, here's a time materials job, web maintenance. I think that this is going to work. So we have a job here that is $25,000, and we have invoiced for $10,000, just over $10,000. We have $17,000 worth of work in this, so there's about $7,200 worth of unbilled time and expenses. If I click on the job and I look at my financials tab, I can narrow this information down by a date range. So I could say I want to see everything from the 1st of July until today. Before I click filter, notice the actual column. You know, I have $17,257.50. When I filter this by date, notice that I now have a significantly lesser amount. And that is because, you know, I'm entering a date range. So the value is being adjusted by the date range. Let's say that I want to go ahead and create an invoice and I want to do it based on the actuals. If I select to add new invoice, if I put in an invoice date, well, let's leave the invoice date as it is. We're going to get, my apologies, I wanted to do that based on actuals. I could do it from this page. I'm going to back it up so I'm making it really clear. I'm going to choose calculate from actuals. And I'm going to leave the billing percentage blank. That's just saying include all the actuals. So here then I have an invoice for $72,1750. So that is the value of all of my unbilled time and expenses. And I'm noticing that there's a couple of accounts missing here, and that might cause us a little bit of an issue with the batch a little bit later. I'll address that when we come to it. But here's a list of all those timesheets. Now, notice that I have timesheets on the 28th of June all the way through the 12th of July. If I were to change my invoice date, so let's say, for example, so keep in mind the number 72,1750. If I adjust the invoice date to the 30th of June and reset my values, sorry about that. What is not adjusting? Let's take another look. To June, if maybe it has to be blank. Actually, there's probably a. Okay. So I'm actually not sure why that's not changing on this page. Let's actually back it up a little bit because I'm expecting that to stay on the 30th of June, but it's not doing so. So I'm going to do it a different way that I know that it will. If I go back and I add that invoice, and from here I adjust it to the 30th of June, notice that we have 38 uninvoiced timesheets. If I adjust it to the 30th of June, there's 10 uninvoiced timesheets. So the value, you know, that $7,200 is not going to be the value of the invoice. The value of the invoice now is $1,745 because it's taking all the time that exists up to that date. The question that was being asked is, instead of saying all the time up to that date, why can't I pick a date range? And it's an interesting question. I mean, I guess obviously since it's being asked, there is a real world scenario that would require this. I find it hard to kind of see one, but you know, of course, I'm sure that there is, because basically what you'd be doing is saying, okay, well, you know, I have invoices I have timesheets in the month of May. I don't want to bill them, but I have invoices in the month of, I have timesheets in the month of June that I do want to bill, but I have invoices in the month of July or timesheets in the month of July that I don't. So I'm putting in a range instead of an invoice date. Keep in mind, you can bill, you know, I could bill 100 timesheets for a total combined value of a single dollar. You know, having the timesheets marked as billed is something that you want to do, even if you don't intend to bill them for their full value. So it's just allowing you to use the time up until the date of the invoice. It doesn't allow us to set a range. Let's see if it resets here when I do this from here. July 13th, actual. So worked in the other direction. So notice that the value jumped up to 72,1750. So I hope that, I mean, it doesn't really answer the question as to why you can't use a range. I guess it just kind of explains the question that was being asked. But typically it's just assuming that, you know, everything up until the date that you're working with. So, you know, sometimes people will create an invoice for the month of June on, like, you know, the 13th of July. So in that case, I'd want to only create invoices up to invoice for the timesheets up until the end of June, include the July timesheets. But unfortunately, you can't use a range. Now, those invoices, you know, being approved is one aspect of the workflow, and here's the new one we just created, where the bookkeeper on a regular basis would be coming in and doing an approval routine. But furthermore, there's also the aspect of syncing them with your accounting, which is a process that if you have your account executives do invoices and the accountants doing the approval process, you're typically not going to post them upon creation. If the bookkeeper is the person doing the invoicing, they're going to post the timesheets upon creation most of the time, and then choose to sync them later or something like that. Or if you're using the online version of QuickBooks, maybe sync them later themselves. Typically, the AE is not going to be the person syncing with accounting. And therefore, the bookkeeper is going to need to, on a regular basis, do an invoice find for the unposted invoices. If you are using accounting integration and you're using the following process, I believe that the invoice approval routine is then redundant, because what I'm about to show you replaces that invoice approval routine. I'm going to do an invoice find for exported status of unposted. Select find. I then have a list of all of my invoices that have not been posted to my accounting. So everything from looks like the 11th of June up until the 13th of July, so about the last month. So I have 50 invoices here. I then need, as the bookkeeper, to sync these to accounting. So up at the top, because my AEs were the ones that created them and they have not been posted or synced, I need to select export up at the top right. And I need to then go through and post the invoice. Now, if you are using QuickBooks Online, the button will say export. So you're going to go through and go click, 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 click. There unfortunately isn't a batch way to do this. It does involve the way that the integration works. So it's not really a decision that we can make. It's just the way that the connection with QuickBooks needs to work. So you do need to go click, 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 click through the list. So you're going to want to make sure you do that, every 2 weeks or every month, or maybe even weekly, and sync those over on a regular basis. But that can also act as an approval routine if you're using that accounting integration. So if you're using the accounting integration, that is the way that you're going to do the invoice approvals if the AEs are the ones creating the invoices. Sophie, what are your thoughts on that? Any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, anything that you want to mention?
No, it looks good. I did have someone just reach out. I know we're going to be heading into the batch stuff pretty soon. He'd really like to see our multi-jobs and projects for a single client on one batch invoice. If you can touch on that.
Absolutely. Multi-jobs, multi-projects for a single client on one invoice. Okay, so let's jump into the batch. So just to kind of reiterate, we have about 10 minutes here. If you're doing, regardless of who's creating the invoices, it's really just about making sure that you're doing it on a regular basis and that you're updating statuses appropriately, you're updating comments if you're using them, you are updating the posted status. Now this is something that usually isn't that much of a problem regarding the posted status because you want it to go into your accounting system and you want to get paid, of course, so that's usually being done, but you don't want it to get away from you. So sometimes it's difficult to set a routine for these things, but it's important. And if you're introducing your AEs to the concept of billing, it's just important to make sure that, hey, you really can't leave the office on Friday. You cannot leave without doing a job find for, yourself as the AE for active and making sure that you're comfortable with that list, that, everything is okay with it, that the appropriate comments are put in, the statuses are appropriate, there isn't anything that's being missed there, and that you're either going through and generating invoices where they need to be generated or putting in the appropriate comment and updating the statuses to make sure that your bookkeeper is aware of these things. Even if it's just, putting in a comment, generating a report, there's a bunch of different reports here that include that comment field. Here's one that would include it if I had values. And you can, of course, manage the columns and then produce your own custom PDF or export if you want. It's just about making sure that you're, keeping on top of that. Now, let's say that we want to do an invoice for a client that is going to have jobs from multiple projects or maybe even not included in any projects, but it's just a bunch of different jobs for different ways of billing them. I want to bill them all, and I want to include them all on one invoice, whether you're the AE or the bookkeeper, regardless of your role. So I'm going to do a job find, and I'm going to search based on company. So in this case, I'm going to search based on a company called Great Atlantic Insurance. So Great Atlantic Insurance is my client, and I'm going to search based on active. So I haven't narrowed this down by any project. I haven't narrowed it down by any other values, just Green Atlantic Insurance and active. Let's say here, invoice, I want to make a quick change to this one. Just want to add in the category so that it's very clear. We're going to do that as a fixed price. So here I have my list of jobs for that client. Notice that some of them are related to a project and some are not. It could be across multiple projects. But the point is that I want to invoice all of these jobs for all the ones that do need to be invoiced, and I want to include them on a single invoice for the client. So something that you'll probably want to do is before you get into it, make sure that you have a report that tells you what you need to bill and why. In this case, I have a mix of fixed price and time materials. Let's just assume that all the time materials, I'm just going to bill for the value of all of them. Now, online survey invitation, notice that I have my actuals are $375, and I've invoiced $375. So there are no unbilled time and expenses. There are for the rest of them, though, and then I have my two fixed price jobs here. So let's say that this, we're going to put in some comments, and we're going to say, bill 25%. And let's just say like bill remainder of estimates. Save those comments, and I then have them there. So before I go in the invoicing process, because I have this mix, I'm going to generate a report, and I'm going to put it to the side. So I have this report telling me what my values are. And then also the comments if necessary. So from there, up at the top, I'm going to choose to add invoice. Now, when I select add invoice, because I selected one company, there's an option that presents itself under batching: single multi-job invoice or multiple invoices in a batch. I'm going to choose single multi-job invoice. I can give it a different name if I want. We'll call this, July invoice. But this is saying it's a single job for a single invoice for multiple jobs. What I choose here is going to default how the initial invoices are created, but I'm going to need to go through and edit them anyways. So none of this really matters. I could even choose, well, I'll just leave it as estimated. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to select that invoice. This next page, if I want to update descriptions and things like that, and then add the jobs. Now, what I'm about to show you is applicable for a lot of different scenarios. In this case, we're creating a single invoice with multiple jobs on it. That might not be what we're doing. Perhaps we are doing a batch invoicing process for multiple jobs across multiple clients, and we just want to do it in a more efficient way. If you are, savvy with the system and you have put in the appropriate comments and you have your report to show you, what to invoice and why, then you can go ahead and choose to add all. And you're then going to need to go down and go through the list. Now, going through this list is quicker than creating the invoices one by one. So, for example, when I look at this corporate website, my comment is saying invoice 50%. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to put in 50% in my billing percentage. I'm going to click on the estimated column, and it enters 50% of my estimate, as my report told me to do. Save and close. I'm then going to look at my internal signage program, which says bill remainder of the estimate. So I'm going to select to edit, and I'm going to choose remainder from estimated. And that fills in the remainder of my estimated. And I'm just noticing that I have a couple accounts that are missing here, and it might actually tell me that in a minute, which is probably related to some accounting testing that I was doing a little bit earlier, well, yesterday actually. And let's actually see if the first one had any accounts missing. No, that's all good. And then, yeah, so from there, it's basically just going through the line. So I'm then, now as I'm going down, I'm now into my time and materials jobs. So my report is telling me I'm now into my time and materials jobs. So I'm just opening them up, selecting actuals, save and close. And it's just billing in the value of the time and materials. And I would just go through that list. And I get to online survey invitation, and this is actually one I don't want to invoice at all, so I'm just going to delete that. So it's no longer a part of the batch. Once I'm satisfied with what I've created, I'll select Finish Adding to Invoice, and I've generated my batch invoice. In this case, it's a single invoice for multiple jobs, so I can look at the jobs that are on the invoice and the amount that we invoiced for each of them. I can choose to produce printouts for all of them individually, but in this case, I'm going to generate a printout. I might not actually have that invoice, that printout created. If I don't, I could actually create it here really quickly. Let's actually do that. Just take me a sec. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going in and I'm going to create a new printout. We're going to call this invoice batch, and that is going to be invoice multi-job printout. And we're going to leave all the defaults except for the reports. I don't want to include those. And actually, I'm going to add in one other one really quickly. We're going to call this expanded. And that is multi-job expanded. And we'll leave all the defaults as they need to be. Okay, so if we look at our invoice there, then we'll be able to choose from those different printouts that we created and then generate the PDF. And there's our PDF for our client with all of the jobs on a single invoice. And again, I just happen to have created a single invoice and multiple jobs, but I could have done anything. Whatever, doesn't matter if it's all for different clients, all for the same client. The process of generating the batch is just about making sure that you have the appropriate statuses, the appropriate job categories, comments if they'll help you, and a report produced that you can look at, so that when you get to that batch and you're editing that batch and you're going through each of those jobs, that you're able to know what to bill and why, so that you can really, really quickly generate all of those invoices all at once. It's a bit more of an advanced function. Myself, if I was doing this regularly, so if I was going to be doing the invoicing for an agency at the end of the month, I would do probably every individual invoice in a large batch and go through them one by one on that page. Anything that could be grouped together, I would do separately, as we just did, multiple jobs on a single invoice. And I would work with the batch almost exclusively. I would very rarely do individual invoices unless some special circumstance required it. Otherwise, I would do everything from the job find where we're doing the batch invoicing. We're bumping right up onto our time here. Sophie, any questions on that process or anything that you think we should address in our last few minutes here?
I just had Daryl ask to please show the invoice in expanded view. I'm assuming that means with all those reporting options that you turned off. Do we have time to quickly look at that?
Yeah. So what he's probably referring to is that expanded printout option, and what that means is the expanded by default is going to include a lot more detail. So for each job, you're seeing all of these different breakdowns. Now I chose just simply the default option, which includes a lot of information. You can narrow that down. So I can choose to show just the service group and its description. I don't need to show each of the line items and their values. There's a lot of options within those print parameters. So you can play around with that. But that expanded view is, as you can see, giving us a lot more detail. So that's an option that you do have.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. This is the first invoices or the first webinar of this type where we're focusing on kind of invoice workflows specific to the roles. I hope it was helpful. I'd recommend giving this a try, taking a look at your statuses, seeing if they're appropriate. Take a look at your job categories, see if they're appropriate. Do they convey the information that your teammates need to know to do their invoicing effectively? Use the system to convey that information. Try not to make it a casual conversation all the time where you're having to go around and talk. I've spoken with a lot of agencies, even some very large agencies with very large accounts, where literally it's one individual walking across the office, going to another person's desk and saying, hey, what do I need to invoice on that job for that big client? And they might write it down in a Post-it or tell them verbally. I see that all the time. It's very common. Use the system, enter your comments. Update them when needed. Update the statuses and use those statuses to know what to bill and why. And then keep on top of them. It's so crucial that when you do a job find and you select Find Active, that the resulting list you get is accurate. And then use those batch invoicing processes where you can. You'll probably find it'll save you time on your invoicing routines. And yeah, check out your printouts and make sure that they're given what you need as well. So as per usual, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be doing a webinar, same bat time, same bat channel. It's going to be for the creatives, the end user of the system, so task management, calendar management, that type of thing. So send your team to that one. It's going to be pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of cool tips and tricks that we're going to be reviewing. So send your team to check that one out. I highly recommend it. If you have any suggestions or requests for different ways we could do the webinars, or different topics, or different information that you'd like to be covered, please by all means do send your suggestions to success@functionpoint.com. Again, that's success@functionpoint.com. We'd love to hear from you for any kind of suggestions that you do have, and we do take those very seriously. So if you have anything that you want to add before we hop off here?
No, everyone's just saying it's been a great webinar, so thank you, Mark.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate all your time. I hope that it was valuable. I hope that it was clear and easy to understand this somewhat advanced topic as best as we could do. So thank you all again. We're going to stay on for the next couple of minutes just in case there's other questions that do pop in. So we'll stay on here. Again, thank you all for your time. For those that do stay on, you might hear my voice just in a minute in case any questions pop up. Otherwise, thanks so much again, and have yourselves a great rest of your week.